Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the program. You are listening and watching an episode of The Big Idea. I'm your host, Jason Seymour. I'm the spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. We started this show because we know that Southeast Asia is filled with leaders. And these leaders not only have big ideas, they turn these big ideas into a reality. And we have one special guest today, one of those leaders. Welcome to the program, Zenna.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason, and for that wonderful introduction as well.
My pleasure. We're going to talk about what makes you passionate, what you fight for, all types of topics today. And I invite the audience to listen in and share with us your thoughts, because we're going to be talking a lot today about human trafficking in a very specific way. And people who know me know that an issue that gets me so passionate and so fired up and so perturbed is human trafficking and exploitation of workers. We have to do what we can together to make this stop. And I know Zenna is doing more than I'm doing on this particular topic, and that's why I'm so pleased to have you with us today. So the first thing I want to talk to you about today is the Seeds for the Future program. This is a program that we operate at US ASEAN. Please tell our audience, what is Seeds for the Future and how did you get involved with this program?
Firstly, thank you so much, Jason, for being an advocate for the cause that Pinkcollar and I stand for. The Seeds for the Future program is a initiative that's run by the U.S. mission to ASEAN, as well as under the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative. And it's essentially a small grant program that is provided to innovative initiatives around Southeast Asia. And my experience with the Seeds for the Future grant actually started in 2018, where I applied for the first time in 2018 and didn't manage to receive the grant. But we kind of just kept trooping and progressing. And in 2019, when we applied for the grant again, we were really grateful to be a grant recipient to help fund the nonprofit arm of the work that I do and that we do to try to eliminate modern slavery practices and human trafficking for migrant workers in Malaysia.
Well, I just want to add to what you said right there, which is such a good tip for everyone in the audience, whether you're applying for Seeds for the Future or participating in any competition. Anyone who's been successful has a story of a failure. When we came in second or third or fourth or much lower on the list, and listen to what Zenna's saying. She didn't give up. She said she regrouped, she tried again, and she was successful later. So that's fantastic. Now, you wanted to get US government assistance to respond to this issue that you care so much about, which is human trafficking and exploitation. When did you first have a light bulb go off? When did you first become aware of human trafficking or exploitation?
I think for a lot of people who live in Malaysia, that experience is quite visceral. I wouldn't say it's firsthand, because coming from a certain demographic in Malaysia, we can't ever say that we know exactly what happens in the life and the experiences of a migrant worker in our country. But Malaysia is pretty unique in that a large number of my peers and even the people that work with me at Pinkcollar would have had the experience of encountering or even being raised by migrant domestic helpers or domestic workers in our lives. So since I was very young, I've always been exposed to migrant workers through the form of my parents, who would hire them to conduct household services at home. So you would have these workers who would be second mothers or take on really important caregiving roles in your lives from a very young age. And the natural emotional bond that results from such a relationship, I would say, provided a really good foundation for us to empathize and understand the issues and the challenges faced by migrant workers here would look like. Yeah, and so, but it wasn't until I was at university, I think, that I really started to look into the systemic issues behind exploitative labor migration. In fact, it was when I was at my year abroad in Russia, when I was volunteering for this social services organization, that I met many African migrants who were pretty much stranded and isolated in Russia because of a promise that they were going to be working in jobs in Europe. But labor recruiters would end up kind of just having them transit in Russia and leaving them there without any documentation and without any sort of money. And it was then when I realized that regardless of where the migrants, were from, or where they were meant to be headed for work, the fact that an exploitative experience exists actually affects a lot of people and a lot of migrants who are looking just for opportunities to support their families and their own livelihoods.
There was so much you said, so much truth in what you were saying, and one point is that this kind of activity, migration for work, it happens in every country. No country, well, better stated, every country has to look at the policies it has in place and how that country employs people. It happens in the United States. It happens all over Southeast Asia. No country is without blemish. Every country is looking at this problem and trying to figure out how to respond to it. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But I do like that you brought that real human element into this experience. And a lot of us are constantly exposed to the workers of migrants, but sometimes we don't think about it deeply. We know when we go to a restaurant that people are in the back washing dishes, but we don't know those people. We don't know their story. We don't know whether they're fairly employed or whether there's shenanigans going on. We don't know. So sometimes it really takes organizations such as yours, Pinkcollar, to just raise awareness of this issue. So what are some things that Pinkcollar does to try to raise the public consciousness about this issue?
I think, of course, we always operate within an ecosystem, but the approach that Pinkcollar has taken is to introduce an ethical recruitment hiring solution to the market in Malaysia, and particularly for households and employers in Malaysia who want to hire migrant domestic workers. So the way that we try to, I would say, improve awareness of the nature and the methods of hiring these workers is that we provide a service that ensures that the workers that we place into their jobs would always be would always be done through ethical worker sourcing and hiring practices. And we have been pretty effective at delivering results for our clients as well, because at the end of the day, when clients and employers approach us to hire, they don't just want an assurance that their potential workers are not going to be trafficked here. They also want to see results in the form of job retention rates and placement success rates. So Pinkcollar has been successful in ensuring that we provide a win-win solution for both workers and the employers we work for, because our workers can undergo a completely ethical and transparent recruitment process where they get an opportunity to even decide which employer and job they want to work for, where they're provided all of the information up front. And they even have the decision-making power to tell us what type of work that they would not feel comfortable doing, and to even dictate very natural things like the salary asks that they would have. And our employers benefit from a service that they pay us for to help them recruit much needed household service workers. And they get a service that delivers more transparency, that delivers more professionalism and honesty in the process. And they get to enjoy the benefits of hiring a worker who really does want to be there and who hasn't been subject to recruitment debt or debt bondage that could affect their job performances here in Malaysia. and enjoy the continued support that Pinkcollar provides to both parties to maximize chances of a successful employment relationship.
It's really well put, because there's an impression that every business is just looking for the cheapest worker and wants to hire people who are unauthorized to be there. And that really isn't true. But sometimes it's a challenge for businesses to ensure that they're not violating any laws, that they really are hiring people legally. And so organizations like yours provide very valuable services to those kinds of businesses.
Yeah, and Malaysia is pretty unique in that hiring services and migrant hiring services in particular are costly and pretty expensive anyway. Any employer looking to hire a migrant domestic worker would be expected to pay perhaps $3,000 to $4,000 US for a single worker. And what we see here in the market is that, you know, service providers are charging these fees, but are providing poor service. So that's how an ethical recruitment model could work well here, because we're not just financially profitable and sustainable as an organization, but we're also working to provide a much better solution at the same market rate, at the same price point.
Right. I do want to comment a little bit on a thought that was shared by an Indonesian member of our audience. And he's talking about the fact that some individuals work very, very long hours and they're paid very minimal salaries. He brought up an example of a domestic worker in a house, sometimes referred to as a housemaid, and the low salary that that individual has, and the amount of work, and the amount of hours that that person has. So in Malaysia, for example, if someone is aware of someone being abused, someone being treated poorly and exploited, what are options? What can people do to be part of the solution?
Right. I think how I can contribute meaningfully is to share the power of, you know, recruitment agencies in how we're involved in every step of the recruitment process, and how we have the means as well to continue checking in on these workers that we've placed to ensure that they have access to grievance and reporting mechanisms. I think the audience member from Indonesia brought up a very pertinent point in that the nature of these jobs are so private, and these things happen behind closed doors, and it could be very hard for government authorities or labor authorities to regulate. But recruitment agencies get that benefit of, you know, having connected with our workers in advance, right, ahead of time. We source and match these workers into jobs, and therefore we build a strong relationship of trust with them. And it is on us to continue maintaining that relationship and checking in on a systematic basis, so that if there are any sort of contractual breaches or any sort of challenges where the worker is facing unsuitable or unsafe workplace environments, that we would be notified of it, and we are provided the opportunity to intervene to help remove workers from such jobs. But of course, we don't just focus on the reactionary and grievance aspect of what we do. We also focus a lot on the preventive approach to ensure that we are providing employers with the right support and even management resources on how to ethically hire their workers. We also vet not just our workers for their preparedness to work in Malaysia, but we vet our clients as well. So at the very first point of engaging our services, we would inform employers that they would have to adhere to what we call a pink-collar ethical hiring pledge, and that they commit to providing workers, you know, possession of their own handphones, communication devices, and identity documents like passports. They would have to respect the workers' freedom to practicing their religion and freedom of movement. And they must not deprive their workers of any sort of communications with their personal networks, including their friends and family back home. And it is only when employers comply with these requirements that we then move on to helping them source suitable workers. So agencies have a huge role to play and a lot of power to dictate what is acceptable and what is ethical in every step of the process. And this is where we come in. I would also like to mention that the grant that we received from the Seas for the Future program actually allowed us to build a really strong and accountable grievance and mediation mechanism for our workers. So at the moment, we have developed a process where we check in at least once every 3 months with all of the workers that we've placed in Malaysia. And we continue to set up these sessions as feedback loops and as feedback mechanisms if we encounter any sort of challenges, that workers would tell us about. We would always build in feedbacks to inform employers about this as well, but in a perspective where we really want these employment relationships to succeed. And so we have been really playing this human resource function within such employment relationships that have always been, by nature, quite informal.
Absolutely. And I don't think I said your name, Abimanyu Kasuma. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. And thank you so much for calling in the program and really caring about modern slavery. Now, I know a lot of government officials throughout Southeast Asia are concerned about the exploitation of workers. And I'm wondering, how is your relationship, or how is the relationship between Pinkcollar and the Malaysian government? Has it been smooth? Did it take a while to develop? How is that going?
That's a very interesting question. One thing that we do to ensure we're ethical is also to make sure that we comply with the laws and regulations from both the source country and the destination country government. And since Pinkcollar focuses primarily on the Philippine to Malaysia corridor at the moment, which means that we source and place Filipino domestic workers into jobs in Malaysia, we make sure that we're fully compliant with not just the laws of the Malaysian Labor Department, but we also take into account our compliance to the Philippine labor laws. So I think taking that effort as a first step and making sure that, we as an employment agency are fully licensed by the Malaysian government and fully accredited by the Philippine labor authorities has allowed us to build I would say a good relationship with the government agencies that we work with. And it's really through our history of operating that we have demonstrated time and time again that we would always opt for the process that is most compliant to the processes that they've set out to try to make labor migration more accountable and legal. Yeah.
What are some techniques within the laws of Malaysia or the operations they do to try to have an element of ethics in the labor of migrants? What are some great things that you can tell us that Malaysia is doing well that would be a role model for other Southeast Asian nations as well as the United States?
I think Malaysia was in the midst of some issues that were spotlighted as a result of COVID. Of course, being home to at least 1.6 million registered migrant workers. And with the actual number of migrant workers, including those that are undocumented, expected to be around 6 million. We've had issues where migrant worker housing was under the spotlight. I think when COVID started and the outbreak started occurring amongst the migrant worker demographic. And the latest developments on that is that the Malaysian government has actually made an amendment to one of the crucial migrant worker acts to only permit companies who comply with certified living and housing conditions for migrant workers to continue to hire these migrant workers for their labor and their requirements here. So that is a huge step, because now it's pretty much in law, and that the government would be granting such licenses and such certifications after reviewing the type of housing that migrant workers would be expected to live in before giving them any sort of approval for a job order or approval for migrant labor. Yeah.
Wonderful to hear some good news.
Yeah.
This really is a very challenging issue, and there's a lot of different ways that it could be solved. I do want to share with you a thought from one of our longtime watchers. Wonderful to see you back, Skylar Lay. and have you participate. And Skylar is giving us an example of sexual harassment, which is a concern for a lot of migrant workers who feel that if they are sexually harassed, they're scared to say anything. They're scared to speak up. So what would happen if one of your workers was having an issue with sexual harassment? How do you, how does Pinkcollar attempt to assist them?
I think, firstly, we have to speak about what the root causes of why workers might not feel safe enough to report these issues in the first place. And we got a lot of insights from working with our Philippine training center partner, a Manila-based nonprofit called the Fair Training Center. And from the very beginning, when we first started, they actually shared a pretty moving anecdote in that when they were conducting their training for these migrant workers who were preparing to go abroad, they actually just threw out a question to ask the trainees and said, if you were getting sexually harassed in your workplace, would you report it or would you quit your job? And not many people said yes. But then they kind of reframed the question. They asked, but what if you were told by the agency that you would not be penalized or charged additional debt to leave these jobs that, you know, in which you're facing these issues? And all of them said, yes, you know, in that case, I would leave my job. So there's a link between, you know, an assumption or fear that if they were to report these conditions that aren't, you know, safe in their jobs, that they would be somehow penalized or charged more recruitment debt by the labor recruiters. Because this has been the way for a very long time. If a placement fails, a lot of the financial liability falls upon the worker. And so how Pinkcollar deals with it is very much preventively. Alongside our training center partner, we've developed a Malaysia-specific curriculum that doesn't just focus on training them for the hard skills that they require to work, but importantly, the soft skills and the life skills that they need in order to know how to work safely here as a migrant in Malaysia. And one crucial intervention that we have is training workers on their contractual rights and what they're obligated and entitled to here in Malaysia, as well as how to manage difficult scenarios. So we literally role play with them. What if this is what you encounter with your employer? What if you experience sexual harassment in the workplace? What is the way to report this? And what are the next steps that you have to take if this is what you face? And of course, that goes hand in hand with building a strong relationship of trust with the workers as well. So continuing to develop this relationship and checking in on them proactively allows us to be at the forefront of any sort of issues that could come up. And thankfully, I'm really grateful to say that Pinkcollar has never had any case or experiences or reports of sexual harassment in the workplace.
Great.
But I'm also glad to say that our team has worked on, you know, preventively and proactively thinking about what would happen and how to avoid the situations if we do encounter them in the future.
I think to just build on what you're saying, it's very important for any recruitment agency such as Pinkcollar to emphasize to the migrant workers that, no, you really can tell us. We really do want to know. We want to protect you because you said that you haven't had any cases, and I hope that that is because there haven't been any incidences of harassment. But as you said, migrant workers can be very afraid to speak up because they're worried that there will be consequences. Fortunately, in talks like this one and other talks, I'm sure you emphasize, no, this is something that we care about. So please let us know if it's happening, and it's good for your reputation as well. I mean, there are multiple benefits, and no company wants to be known as being permissive of sexual harassment. I shouldn't say no company, but the majority of companies are concerned about these issues.
Yeah. And you know, you're right. We're always mindful of our role as the placement agency as well, to always honor that right that a worker has to leave their jobs and terminate their employments. And we play a very crucial role to enabling that and then helping the worker get to the decision making on her own. And we honor that and ensure that any sort of placement termination is always done fully legally and in a way that's good for both the employer and the worker.
Now, we did get a bit of a controversial question, so I'm not quite sure whether I should ask this or not, because I don't want to put you on the spot, but it does bring up an interesting issue. And this question is from, it's again from Abimanyu Kasuma, our Indonesian, and he's wondering about particular tensions for Indonesian migrant workers in Malaysia. And so it brings up an interesting issue of national origin, sometimes race, sometimes religion. Do you find that within the exploitation of workers, are specific individuals targeted more than others? Is there a racial or nationality component to this problem, or does it go across all nations, all identities? What are your thoughts?
I think the stigma towards domestic workers, firstly, it could be job specific, right? The nature of a domestic worker role is that perhaps a lot of the public still don't fully recognize it as, actual labor. And that's usually tied to a gender perspective, right? Where a lot of the labor that occurs, in households, the labor of care is often not quantified. And there is definitely a stigma that extends across all domestic workers, regardless of nationality or culture. But Kusuma is right in that Indonesian domestic workers, perhaps there could be a generalization that Indonesian domestic workers are not afforded the same labor rights compared to Filipino domestic workers, which would be the main demographic, the main and only demographic we currently work with. So forgive me if our perspective could be quite limited, because our practical experience has always been from the Philippine to Malaysia corridor, but we have plans to expand into Indonesia in the future, which is why we continue to monitor the situation so that we can execute responsibly in the future. And the reality of migrant recruitment in Malaysia is that it highly depends on the regulations and the enforcements of the source countries that determine what sort of labor rights that the workers are afforded. For example, the Philippine Labor Department regulates the hiring of their Filipino workers into Malaysia very strongly. So if you were an employer in Malaysia and you wanted to hire a Filipino domestic worker, you would have to sign a separate employment contract that is standard form and prepared by the Philippine labor authorities, in which you have to ensure the workers' rights to certain things. Even aspects like a worker's minimum salary in Malaysia is controlled if you are a Filipino domestic worker. And a minimum salary for a Filipino domestic worker is $400 US. There's also a rest day provision that the Philippine labor authorities introduce, in that workers must be afforded at least one day off or a rest day every week, or be paid overtime if they're made or if they're asked to work on a rest day. And so because the Philippine government has gotten involved in regulating working conditions for their workers, you definitely see that it reflects in the market, in which employers who hire Filipino workers would be aware that they would need to pay their workers higher, they would need to give effect to the workers' day off once a week, and so on. But if you look at the Indonesian if you look at the demographic of Indonesian domestic workers in Malaysia, and interestingly, Indonesian domestic workers make up about 80% of the total number, of the total amount of registered domestic workers.
So Kasuma's question is definitely relevant.
And that's also why we have such an interest and drive and passion to someday also expand our ethical recruitment model for the Indonesia-Malaysia corridor, because that's the reality of the demographic of domestic workers in Malaysia, is that most of them are Indonesian. And because the source country government doesn't play as much of an active role in the enforcement and the monitoring of Indonesian workers' working conditions here, you often see a higher prevalence of mistreatment and poor living and working conditions for them. So rest days aren't currently enforced and regulated for Indonesian domestic workers, and their minimum salary differs a lot as well. Because what is the formal rule is that Indonesian domestic workers will be paid the minimum salary in Malaysia, whatever that is at that point in time. And because there isn't much enforcement and monitoring to ensure that maybe employers who have hired Indonesian domestic workers for a certain period of time update or improve their job provisions in accordance with these new laws or with these new directives, we often see that Indonesian migrant workers tend to be more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up a really good point, and it's important for the audience, people who are concerned about this issue. Yeah. So there's always the side of the country that is regulating employment of migrants. And then there's the other side, the country that is providing the migrant workers, and they need to be involved in the conversation too, because it's a two-way conversation between government to government. And of course, NGOs need to monitor and give ideas and give suggestions how this could be better operated. So it's a large conversation. So there's a lot of room for people such as yourself to provide input, to create a model, a model to say to the Malaysian government and all the governments of Southeast Asia and the United States, like, here's something that works. A recruitment agency, this is what we do. It's working well. Use us as a model to inspire others. So I love that. But I do want to ask you a question. I want to take just a little bit of a step back from the topic. This is a very tough issue. It's a very serious issue. It's a very dark issue. How do you stay positive? I mean, you seem, you're smiling, you're enthusiastic, you believe you can make a difference. Where do you find your inspiration to keep going and stay positive?
I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that the work that we do isn't easy. I think COVID in particular brought a whole new set of challenges that we are still continually facing and working through today. But I think I speak not just for myself, but on behalf of the entire team that I work with, in that a lot of our passion and our drive to continue on is really from the migrant workers and from the beneficiaries that we serve. I think regardless of what issues or challenges we're facing day to day in the runnings of our social business, it can't ever compare to the day-to-day challenges and struggles that our migrant workers tell us about, that they experience. And so a lot of the time, it's really about that shift in perspective. We might be having a particularly challenging day, we might be facing a particular work crisis, but when we kind of hone back to why we're doing this and what the longer term vision is, it continues to energize us and helps us keep going. Because honestly, like, the migrant workers that we encounter, not just our workers, but even the many migrant workers that we encounter in our day-to-day lives in Malaysia, our security guards, our domestic workers, they have a certain kind of resilience that is truly humbling and inspiring. And I think that remembering to have this perspective has allowed us to continue pushing on and ensuring that we survive and our organization survives this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Excellent points there. And I just want to add to one of them. When I'm mentoring people, and certainly when I'm talking to members of our Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative Network, and if you're between the ages of 18 and 35 and you're a Southeast Asian and you're not a member of our Waisili network, what are you waiting for? Please join us. But when I'm mentoring Waisili folks or anyone, I say, if you want to have an impact in this world, you have to figure out what you are really passionate about. And then you will be able to push through the tough days because you really believe in what you're doing. And I hear that from you. I can feel your passion virtually and how important this issue is to you. And it's wonderful. Now, I know that you have been involved in a lot of causes for a long time, and you had a wonderful opportunity to go to the United States to develop your skills. And tell us a little bit about that. I know where you went, but tell our audience where you went and a little bit of your experience there.
Of course. Well, I actually didn't go to the States for university. I was in London instead, and that was the bulk of where I started learning about what social innovation and social entrepreneurship looks like. I had the opportunity to attend several innovation labs and social entrepreneurship training programs across Europe. But once I graduated and moved back to Malaysia, one of the first opportunities I applied for with Pinkcollar as a passion project was the World Bank Youth Summit. And this was the end of 2017. And at the time, Pinkcollar was purely a passion project that was set up to try to figure out what the best solution would be to eliminate modern slavery practices and worker exploitation from Malaysia's domestic work sector. And we were so grateful that the World Bank Youth Summit actually saw the value in the work that we were trying to do and selected us as one of the 5, I think, if I'm not recalling wrongly, 5 finalists to be flown out to Washington to present as part of the pitch competition that they had for the summit. So I think this was in December 2017. It was winter. It was amazing. I didn't get much sleep while I was there because I was so busy preparing for the competition, and I was a part of all of the different amazing opportunities and activities that they had for the participants of the summit. But it all culminated into Pinkcollar being one of the 2 winners of the entire competition. And things just progressed from there because our presence at the summit in Washington led to us being selected to join a mentor network that's also based in Washington called the Mentor Capital Network. And from there, I was introduced to a American social entrepreneur based in Hong Kong, who's running a foundation called the Fair Employment Foundation. And they utilize a ethical recruitment model to also try to impact the domestic workspace there. And that's where the mentoring and resource sharing started, which all culminated into Pinkcollar being the solution that it is today. So it all kind of like connected. And I would say it started from, like weirdly enough, it started from the US, and this is where we are.
I love that story, the importance of networking, the importance of mentoring. We meet so many people in our lives, and we just never know how each of those individuals might help us. But you have to get out, you have to just meet as many people as you can. And that's how we turn those big ideas into a reality, as I say. We're running out of time, but I just want to ask you a couple lighter questions. Tell me something that you really enjoyed in DC. Did you get to do any tourism or see a museum or see a play when they were having them before COVID?
Oh, I was there for like 3 days. And the day after, I walked, I had a really nice walk around the White House compound.
Oh, fantastic.
And I watch House of Cards, and there's always scenes where like one of the main characters, Claire Underwood, would be like running around the compound, and I passed the exact same route. That was really like exciting for me. But I did actually take the train from Washington DC all the way to New York, like the day after the summit, because one of my close friends went to school in NYU, and I didn't get to spend as much time there as I wanted, but when the restrictions lift.
I hope you get to go back. And so I know that you are in Kuala Lumpur today, and I have not had the opportunity to visit KL. So what would be your tourist recommendation, other than sitting down with you for tea in some nice tea house? What would be a tourist spot that I must visit when I get to KL?
I think the one place that people would usually visit if they want to be within the KL vicinity, the KL Selangor vicinity, would be the Batu Caves. So it's it's a place of religious worship. You have but there's like a hike, I think a few hundred steps to get up there, and it's a really great place to visit, especially if you don't have much time in KL. And I feel a bit like put on the spot here as well, because like there's actually so many food recommendations that we would provide to like tourists coming here, because I think that's one of the things that are truly like spectacular about Malaysia is our food and our cuisine and the different ways you can dine in here. But of course, just come to Malaysia after all these, COVID's over, and my team and I will be happy to bring you around. And
well, as soon as I get the opportunity, I'll be emailing you and asking for restaurant recommendations. And I certainly hope we get to go to a restaurant together and you could introduce me to wonderful Malaysian food. So unfortunately, audience, we have run out of time. As usual, filled it up so wonderfully from our guest who had so many insights to share with us. And he's so passionate about an issue that is always in my heart: human trafficking, the exploitation of workers. We need to do what we can. We all can play a small role. And thank you so much to our audience members, to Skylar, to Kasuma, who had such wonderful stories and good questions. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for caring about this issue and tuning in. And until the next episode of The Big Idea, bye, everyone.
thank you.